Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Eric Fisk, professor of political science and government, and this is episode 2 in a sort of mini series, I guess. I don't really have a name for it. I guess maybe sort of recap of the 2024 election and understanding the future of American politics. I need to come up with a better name than that. I'll come up with some catchy title for this. But yeah, this is video 2. And so, as I said in the first video, if you haven't seen that, go back and check the first video, sort of explaining what I'm doing here. Probably going to have about 4 or 5 short videos here, kind of talking about sort of big picture trends that I'm seeing in American politics and why the 2024 election is important unto itself, but also is concerning in a larger picture of things going on in American politics and government. And so today I want to talk about windows. And so if you're like me and you're old enough to remember American politics from 10, 20, 30 years ago, you might have noticed that it seems like conversations around politics have gotten a little bit more extreme in some ways, right? That policies that maybe once were considered extreme are now normal, or at least being accepted by the major parties or one of the major parties. And so today I want to just give you a quick sort of like crash course 101 on the Overton window, which is a way that helps us political scientists and the general public sort of understand policies and what's acceptable as far as policy solutions in American government. So it's sort of like the Overton window is this concept that a guy came up with, I don't know, like 30 years ago. But basically, it's what we call sort of like a shortcut or heuristic, a way of understanding something that's really complex and kind of simplifying it so we can sort of start working with it and understanding it better. And so basically, I want you to sort of measure, or in your mind, I want you to think about an actual window, right? So think about like a glass pane. And in American policies, or in any country actually, there is sort of a range of acceptable and understandable and popular or sensible solutions to any sort of policy issue, any sort of problem, right? And so what people propose as a solution to that would have to fall within that window for the general public to accept it as like, yeah, that would be a good idea. So just to sort of give you an example, I'm trying to think of what are like random. Let's say that your community is overrun by a hamster infestation, right? I don't know why I picked hamsters. Don't just roll with me here. Within ideas of like how do you solve it? We got millions of hamsters running around our neighborhood. What do we do? One side might say that, oh, we need to set out a bunch of traps and catch them all and put them into a new hamster sanctuary that we've now built or something like that, right? And somebody might say, sure, that sounds like an acceptable policy solution, but I might not agree with that because it costs too much money or it's too difficult, right? So somebody might say we just need to eradicate them, right? Maybe we need to have licenses and people can just go kill all the hamsters and just pay people to kill hamsters to get rid of the infestation. Again, some people might disagree with that, but some people say, yeah, that is a possible solution, right? Now imagine somebody steps in and says, we should just nuke the whole community, right? Just everybody evacuate, we'll just bomb the whole community, and then we'll have to rebuild from scratch. Like, that's ridiculous. Nobody sees that as that is sort of an unthinkable, a completely radical policy solution to something that people are like, that's no. Or even the opposite, maybe just like, there is no problem. Let's just live with the hamsters for the rest of our lives, right? And so those would be what we consider outside of the Overton window. And so in any sort of society or government, you have sort of the range of what the public would say is that's an acceptable policy solution, and what we see as like, oh no, that's too radical, that's too much. And this happens all the time, right? And so you can take, and that Overton window sort of shifts as culture and society kind of evolves over time on different issues. So like marriage equality, for most of American history, the idea of same-sex marriage was considered like radical, unthinkable, like no way, we can never do that, right? That was way out here in the Overton window. And then through organizations and popular culture and social movements and people pushing to have this accepted, the window started to shift, right? And what used to be considered just unthinkable became, oh, why aren't we doing that, right? And actually the majority of the American people accepted and wanted marriage equality before the Supreme Court actually deemed it as a national right. And so that's a good example of sort of how the Overton window can kind of shift based on things that are going on in society. Now, it's important to remember this is happening for every individual policy, right? So immigration and taxes and foreign policy and all these cultural issues and all that kind of stuff. It's not an ideology. It's sort of like one window pane for each individual policy. And so maybe another way to sort of like keep running with this metaphor here is to sort of like say, like, imagine multiple window panes constantly shifting for each individual issue. And the two political parties in America are trying to sort of scry through and say, what are the acceptable policy solutions according to the public right now on all of these issues, because they're trying to create a platform that's acceptable to the American public to get elected, because that's what they want to do. If they want to enact policies, they have to win elections. So they're not going to have a platform of tons of policies that fall all outside of the Overton window, because they'll never get elected. Now, political parties can also influence those Overton windows themselves because they're very powerful in many ways, but that's sort of what they're trying to look for, that sort of like sweet spot of all of these different policies that give them a platform as a party to stand on, to run on. And so what's been happening then in America, and why political scientists are concerned, is things are different now, right? This has been going on for hundreds of years, as always happens in a society, this like range of acceptable policies, but it's changed recently. The intensity and the force by which things have shifted and changed and what's become acceptable is different. Why? I would argue that most of it has to do with social media, or just media in general, right? Like the force, the intensity, and the quickness that we can get information and shift people's attitudes and beliefs about policies is just so much more intense than it was 20, 30 years ago. And when you add on top of all of that the power of social media, the algorithm that puts us into echo chambers, so we start seeing our own things feedback to us all the time, right? We all know about echo chambers, right? We only see the things that the algorithm wants us to see because it knows who we are and it knows what we like. And people will start basically watching the news and feeding the news that they want to see into their feed. It sort of allows them to then accept policies in that bubble so much more quickly than it was in the past. I mean, it's got to the point actually even now where people will literally move. We're actually seeing demographic trends of people moving into neighborhoods and states to be around people that are more like them, this whole like super echo chamber. And this is concerning because it then allows what used to be very, very unthinkable, radical, fringe beliefs creep into the Overton window that would have never happened maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so if we look at this, what we see happening is the Overton window for so many major serious policies has shifted really far right. And so in previous times, if someone proposed one of these radical policies and it started to make headway, you might see social movements or organizations or just some sort of like general public pushback on some of these because they would see like, no, that's super radical. But now that a lot of these policies have kind of started falling into the Overton window, you actually have the majority of people, or a significant group of people, that see it as an acceptable policy. And so now there's going to be much less resistance from it because it's now in that window. It's not seen as radical by a lot of people. And I think that the sweeping Republican wins last week signals, at least to some degree, that some of these sort of fringe and radical ideas of like extreme nationalism and isolationism and rejection of democratic norms are now kind of mainstream. And so what are these sort of far right, maybe what we would call conservative populist ideologies and policies? Is it fascism? Is it not fascism? Better yet, what is fascism, right? That's a term that's come up a lot. So in the next video, I actually want to talk about that, like what is fascism and what is it not, so that we can get a better understanding of maybe some of the big picture disturbing trends that are happening in American politics. So I'll see you in the next video.